Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Jason White and this is Jason's Weird Reads. And if you just stumbled upon here and don't know who I am, well, I like to talk about, on this channel, all I talk about are books. Horror books, fantasy books, and some science fiction books. And in this video is batch number 2 of the horror books that I read in the first quarter of 2021. I read Coming of the Old Ones by Jeffrey Thomas. Now this is like a chapbook of two short stories and one novella. And let me read you the synopsis here. As with the last batch, I'm going to read the synopsis and then just give you my thoughts, the good and the bad, and then we'll go on to the next one. So the first story is Around the Corner. That's a man whose parents raised him in a cult suspects the new tenants in his apartment complex belong to a similar cult and are summoning up powers that will change the world, and not for the betterment of humankind. In the next story, After the Fall, around the world, after a great storm, the sky becomes filled with fossilized remains of vast monsters locked in an ancient conflict, leaving humans to interpret this vision and to consider their own humble existence. And the final story, Scrimshaw. In this alternate history set in 1851, men in seafaring ships do not harvest whale blubber, but seek strange treasures in the bodies of immense alien creatures. So these three stories are all very they're all very much weird fiction. And they're all very much Lovecraftian fiction. My favorite of the three, I would say, is either the first or second story, as I don't honestly even remember very much of Scrimshaw, the last story. Around the Corner, this story grabbed me actually from the beginning. As our character, this story, I don't know what to say about it, honestly, because, well, it's about this guy who lives in an apartment complex. And the one thing I liked that Jeffrey Thomas did in this story is how it reminded me a lot of the apartment condo-like building that my dad lived in until recently. It just seemed like, how you have like these apartment buildings where in this one section of town where they all look the same, inside and outside. And it's almost like people being grouped together in boxes. And so he kind of goes into what it's like to live in one of these places. And so you get the sounds coming from above, from the people who live right above you. And this is what leads our character to think that maybe the cult that his own family was in when he was a kid, these people up above him might be in something similar because of the chanting and whatnot he's hearing. So he goes and investigates, and he kind of gets lost, and at the end of the story, he gets lost again, and it goes into some very, very strange territory, which makes you go, what? But also engages your sense of wonderment and awe. And so I really enjoyed that story. After the Fall was pretty interesting as well. The fossils that are in the sky were pretty fascinating. So overall, I would recommend this, especially if you want to get into more Lovecraftian like fiction, because the point of writing Lovecraftian fiction isn't to completely mimic H.P. Lovecraft or his Cthulhu mythos. It's more of to come up with your own thing. And Jeffrey Thomas does this brilliantly, and I recommend it for that alone. After I read Later by Stephen King, I decided that I was going to go on a Stephen King kick, and it began and ended with Revival. Let's get into the synopsis. In a small New England town in the early 60s, a shadow falls over a small boy playing with his toy soldiers. Jamie Morton looks up to see the striking man, the new minister, Charlie Jacobs, along with his beautiful wife, will transform the local church. The men and boys are all a bit in love with Mrs. Jacobs, The women and girls, including Jamie's mother and beloved sister, feel the same about Reverend Jacobs. With Jamie, the Reverend shares a deeper bond, based on their fascination with simple experiments in electricity. Then tragedy strikes the Jacobs family. The preacher curses God, mocking all religious beliefs, and is banished from the shocked town. He's not really banished; he just leaves. Anyway, Jamie has demons of his own. In his mid-30s, he's living the nomadic lifestyle of bar band rock and roll. So he's like always on tour, and he becomes addicted to heroin. Stranded, desperate, he sees Jacobs again, a showman on stage creating dazzling portraits and lightning. And their meeting has a profound consequence for both men. Their bond becomes a pact beyond even the devil's devising, and Jamie discovers that revival has many meanings, because for every cure, there is a price. So, just to give a little bit of what this book is about, is that Charles Jacobs, he's the minister, and he discovers while he's in this small town with the main character here, as a boy, he learns how to use electricity to heal people. But as the ending of this synopsis says, the healing tends to come with very, very steep price. Now, there's a lot of really interesting things that are going on in this story, and I have to read it again at some point, just so I can get my feelings straight on it, because I did really enjoy this story, but it didn't hit me the way I wanted it to. But as I'm thinking about it now, I'm really interested in the things that happen in this story, because Charles Jacobs starts off as a good guy, and he ends up being a villain. But he's a villain. He's probably one of Stephen King's best villains, because he's the most human. He becomes what he becomes because of loss and pain and grief. And I just find that fascinating. I didn't want Charles Jacobs to become a bad guy, because he's likable. And he's even likable when he's a bad guy. He's still the same guy, he's just doing bad things. And he's not even necessarily a villain, but he's got to, there comes a point in the story where he has to be stopped. And so it's very interesting for that reason alone. And it's a very good book, though. I'm glad I finally read it. People have been bugging me to read that one for a very long time, and I just kept putting it off. And although it didn't hit the mark the way I wanted it to, I think it was just built up too high. I was going in expecting to have my socks blown off, and they weren't, but I still enjoyed myself. I also read To Be by Mark Allen Gunnels. I had him on the show, and we talked about this book among other things. You can catch that up here if I remember, but definitely down there. Here's the synopsis. Berkeley woke up to find himself in the hospital. He discovered that his ex is dead after a failed murder-suicide attempt. With nowhere else to go, Berkeley must return to the apartment where it all happened. It doesn't take long for Berkeley to begin to suspect that his ex never left the apartment and still wants him dead. I don't want to get in it because this is a very short story. It's like not a short story, it's a novella, but it's like 100 pages. And I don't want to give away any, because it does have I'm not even going to get into that. What I am going to say about this story, though, is that I have said before about Mark Allen Gunnels' work, that he can, in one piece, be very sweet and make you smile, maybe even cry at the sentiment that's going on within the story. But then he can be, in the next story, very angry and bitter, and he can do great, terrible things to his characters. And this is an example of him doing great, terrible things to his characters. Because yes, the apartment is haunted, and you don't really know who it's haunted by until much later in the book. And it's very dark concept as to what's going on in this book. So I enjoyed the majority of this book. There's parts where I kind of wish the language of Mark's writing was a little bit more. I wouldn't exactly count myself as a as a prose snob, but I do like uh, prose that tickles the brain, so to speak. Mark Allen Gunnell's prose is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's very simple, and he talked about this actually in the interview. And I kind of wish it wasn't quite as simple as it is. But other than that, this is a very, very well done novella, and I recommend it just for the darkness of it. And finally, I read Anoka by Shane Hawk. Now, this is a collection of short stories, and let's read the synopsis. Welcome to Anoka, Minnesota, a small city just outside the Twin Cities, dubbed the Halloween capital of the world since 1937. Here before you lie several tales involving bone collectors, pagan witches, werewolves, skeletal bison, and clone children. It is up to you to decipher between fact and fiction as the author has woven historical facts into his narratives, which would be interesting to find out what they were. With his debut horror collection, Shane and Arapaho author Shane Hawk explores the themes of family, grief, loneliness, and identity through the lens of Indigenous life. So, the things that I really enjoyed about this book the most were the connections to Indigenous life, as it's suggested in that last paragraph there. And I really appreciate the horror because, well, the only other name, when you think of horror and Indigenous writing, you think of Stephen Graham Jones. I think we need much more. And Shane Hawk is a welcome new voice. The So I remember I listened to these on Audible, and I remember enjoying every single story. The negative of this, though, is that I don't remember any of them now. I'm going to have to reread them because for some reason the stories just did not stick. I read these stories fairly early on in 2021, and sometimes I just don't remember. So I do remember enjoying them, and I would highly suggest people reading it because if I remember correctly, some of them are quite violent. But like I said, I want to give this one a reread, maybe with my eyes. It could have been the reason why I don't remember these stories is because it could be something as simple as that I listened to the audio and didn't pay as much attention as I should have, which can be very it can happen. Let's just say that. But I would recommend anyone checking it out for the Indigenous angle to horror stories, if for no other reason. And you know what? I really love the cover artwork for this book. I'm going to have to buy this book just for that alone because it is beautiful. It's so very simple, and yet at the same time, it's very beautiful. I'm trying to pull it up here on my cell phone so I can show you, but it'll be up there anyway. So that is it for my second batch of the first quarter of 2021. My second batch of horror stories that, this wasn't necessarily a review so much as what I read and what I thought of it and the synopsis. So thank you for watching and keep being safe out there and keep being creative, and I'll catch you guys in the next bookish video.